Manhattan Borough President Scott Stringer, Deputy President Rosamond Pierre-Louis, my fellow speakers, Mayor Bloomberg, Ms. Maya Wiley, dear brothers and sisters, all. I thank you for inviting me to join you today. I am pleased to return to Columbia University, where I attended the Graduate School of Journalism 47 years ago. Mayor Bloomberg is the expert here, but I certainly like to think of myself, at least partly, as a New Yorker. Some of the most formative years and fruitful years of my life were spent here. I first arrived in New York 61 years ago, the year Jackie Robinson started playing with the Brooklyn Dodgers. Watching him play shortstop remains one of my most vivid and fondest memories. Later, I entered Marino Seminary in Ossining. And after becoming a priest, I returned to New York City to study at Columbia. In 1970, I founded a publishing company, Orbis Books. I will say more about that in a moment. And resided in the area for several years. More recently, I assumed the presidency of the 63rd session of the United Nations General Assembly and reside in Kips Bay. There are a few years in between, which I won't try to cover here today. So, I love the city and have known it over many decades, watching it change and evolve. It gets more beautiful every day, thanks in part, no doubt, to our dear Mayor Bloomberg. Today, I hope I can contribute to this meeting by providing some observations on food policies, drawing on my international experience and applying it to the local context of New York City. This is an issue dear to my heart and one that I have made a priority in this session of the General Assembly. From an international point of view, I do believe that the current food crisis that we are watching unfold on a global scale is a symptom of a broader breakdown of models of governance and production that have failed us and betrayed the trust of billions of people around the world. They are unsustainable, and we must find alternatives both internationally and locally. The food crisis is linked directly to our financial crisis, the energy crisis, and the overarching problems associated with climate change. Can you hear me? Yeah. Without innovative and broad changes in our food policies, we will see hunger once again spread across the world like a medieval plague. The shameful reality is that despite the fact that we have the knowledge, the financial and technological means to prevent it, half of the human population subsists worldwide, subsists at levels of malnutrition and poverty completely incompatible with their inherent dignity and rights. This is not only shameful, it is, to use a religious terminology, downright sinful. In addition to being a priest and a community organizer, I am an internationalist. My sense of internationalism and the spirit of solidarity that guides me are in part inspired by the education and work here in New York. I mentioned earlier that I headed a publishing house called Orbis, reflecting the concern of the Mariner Order. Our publications focused on moral and spiritual issues related to global affairs. At Orbis, we brought new voices to the world scene. Our authors, many of them from new independent developing countries, brought differentiation to a debate that was increasingly dominated by the monotone voices advocating a one-size-fits-all vision of humanity. These views serve as the foundation for what I have done since and for what I have to say today about politics of food. Today, we still must move beyond homogeneity, monocultural hegemony into a new and revitalized biodiversity and differentiation. We need a new localization and communal participation. A politics of food needs to be rooted in the local, distinctive, and communal. It has to be fully representative of all members of the community, and it needs to be closely linked to a global reality as well. The United Nations is changing. It has taken decades of failed development policies to realize that we must put people first, that we must listen to the voices of people most affected by poverty and hunger, which are shocking in their global dimensions. The long-standing top-down approach has enabled lopsided development and outrageous abuses. It has led to the lamentable situation where we are today, the unfettered pursuit of neoliberal policies and the culture of aggressive individualism that they engender contradict the core values and principles of all of our religions and ethical philosophical traditions. As well, they clash with our innate common sense. I have come to think of the General Assembly. I have come to think of the General Assembly as the town meeting of the global village. We feel at home here in New York, and as concerned citizens should bring something to this reflection on the politics of food in this great city. I would like to provide some thoughts on the global and the local, the universal and the particular. As in many other cities of the world, hunger and poverty in New York coexist side by side with obsessive consumption and staggering wealth. A recent report on poverty from the Center for Economic Opportunity points out that 1 in 4 New York residents live in poverty. 1 in 5 children is hungry in New York. These are statistics that highlight a profound moral lapse in our governance. Unfortunately, they reflect the reality in cities all around the world. Our problems are complex and interrelated. I understand that New York City has lost 1/3 of its supermarkets in the last 5 years. helping create nutritional wastelands and contributing to diet-related chronic diseases. This is not the New York that most of the world knows from television and movies. The vigorous and innovative response to the food-related problems by New York activists, NGOs, and government agencies are not well known or understood. As a media capital, the center of global financial markets, and a place for great power, New York has historically had a central role in promoting the dominant global and industrial food system, a system which has entered a process of decline. The meltdown on Wall Street and the growing calls for the overhaul of the deeply flawed Bretton Woods institutions have initiated a process of dramatic change in the international financial architecture. We can only hope that the days of the dominance by the monoculture of industrialized food, Monsanto and Cargill, McDonald's and Walmart are numbered as well. And we need to shape that change. We have good advice on food politics from many places. Last month, the United Nations World Food Day highlighted the work of the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, and the UN Environment Programs, UNEP, in the areas of food policy, and raised alarms regarding the spreading of food crisis. UNEP, for example, recently released a report indicating that organic, small-scale farming can deliver the increased yields which were thought to be preserved of industrial farming. And they can do it without the environmental and social damage caused by industrial agriculture. Other reports point to the ecological damage and extraordinary cost related to meat production. The International Assessment of Agriculture, Science, and Technology in Development released its exhaustive report earlier this year, reflecting the work of many United Nations offices, which emphasized that current methods of food production are no longer sustainable. It argued that we must change from industrial to agroecological methods. Again, we are at a moment of dramatic change, perhaps a turning point. The voices for change are multiplying and are finally being heard as old systems collapse in exhaustion. It is time for a new politics of food that starts from the bottom up, not the top down. We need to have an approach to food production that is multifunctional, that has a concern for the poor and their rights to food, a concern for the earth and its right to life, a concern for communities and their right to self-governance, what is referred to as food sovereignty. At the United Nations, I have made democratization of the organization my #1 priority. So too, in food politics, I would advocate food democracy. we can move our food provisioning away from dominance by a few very large corporations to the control of people-oriented food systems that respect communities and their right to food sovereignty, and localized and regionalized food system at the local and regional levels. I hear that the city is producing more and more food for itself and bringing growing regional bounty into the city. Farmers' markets and urban gardens are beginning to flourish again. These efforts of feeding the city by the city for the city should be part of a global effort that can only enhance food security and diminish the number of hungry people among us. We can make New York City a model for a new food politics that puts the poor, our communities, and the right to food at the center of a more sustainable system of self-governance. We can be a model that is appropriated and replicated in cities around the world. It is easy to envision New York as a model of urban-rural partnership and the development of a vibrant market for locally grown food. The UN would be honored to showcase such efforts at the next meeting of the Commission on Sustainable Development here at the headquarters in 2009. On World Food Day at the United Nations, I said that an alternative food politics means that we must begin by expanding the circle of decision-making and ensuring that multiple and varied voices are heard. This is not accomplished through symbolic events or publicity stunts. New stakeholders must participate and at all levels, from the local to the international. Let us keep in mind that for some people, these solutions are coming too late. Hunger, malnutrition, exclusion, and poverty are taking thousands of lives each day. New York has many advantages. Let us use them. Now is the time to bring to the forefront the voices of our scientists, our community activists, and above all, our food producers, to proclaim what should have been a fundamental right in every society, the right to food. Moreover, we must stop deluding ourselves and face up to the fact that the haves of this world must change their way of life. The patterns of